आज इंटरनेट सिर्फ आधे अधूरे सच और पूरे झूठ में डूबा हुआ है। किसी के पास गहराई से सोचने का या शांति से सुनने का वक्त ही नहीं है। हम एक ऐसा शांत कोना बनाने की कोशिश कर रहे हैं। Nope, not your ordinary podcast for entertainment.
Nope. Your writings seem to disturb the establishment. And by the establishment, I mean, in a way, it's upper-caste men who take offense to it. Why do you think that happens with most of the good writers seem to disturb the same people? Why does that happen?
Okay. I mean, I have an answer to this, which is quite complicated and all over the place. But I have to be honest and, I want to explore this when I answer the question. So the interesting thing is, writing disturbs the establishment. I think that's why I write. I write in order to disturb this establishment. I also write because, we live in, I think especially where I come from, Tamil and, but also, the kind of Indian society we have, where I think silence is taken for granted. And so silence is taken as everything is peaceful. Like, the Tamil word for silence is also the Tamil word for peace, amaidi. So, so if you're not speaking, the assumption is that everything is peaceful. So you have to talk in order to disrupt and in order to say these things. So I think a lot of my aim of writing is to create conversation. And you cannot create conversation if you say the same things. You have to be very provocative in order to trigger speech, in order to make sure that people talk. So do I offend? Sometimes yes. But why do I offend? Not because I want to hurt somebody's sentiment. I offend because that's the only way to initiate a conversation. We don't have the space for dialogue. We don't have a space where I say, as a woman, I'm facing problems. As a lower caste person, you're facing problems. Can we address this? Because that dialogue has gone away. So you say something offensive and then then the conversation begins because they take offense. Otherwise, there's no conversation happening. I think this is the, the kind of philosophical or whatever, like intellectual backdrop to where I come from. But again, this idea that, it's the upper caste men who are rattled, I think that has to be possibly teased out because who are the people in my DMs? I think a lot of upper caste men are in my DMs, right? So I also see their offense taking is very performative. They have to take offense in order to signal to a group of people that, this is disturbing the peace. But personally, how do they actually interact with the work? And here it's quite interesting because personally, I think it gives them a certain high. I don't want to go into the logics of it or, or where it works. But the idea is somebody is challenging them and knowing that, it's a power game. At the heart of it, they find it like, a chase. And the second thing here is also, and I keep thinking like, what is it? I mean, to rephrase your question another way, I keep thinking that because they are reacting to my work, because they're responding to it, even if it's by hate, even if it's by all of these threats or whatever it is, name calling, in some way I'm staying relevant. Because the worst thing would be that I'm not relevant, nobody talks about what I'm doing or what I'm trying to say. But the question then again is in the last 10 years or last 15 years, for instance, I used to be writing columns in, India Today, Week, Outlook, The Hindu. I used to appear on NDTV, NDTV, which is not today's NDTV, but what it was in its earlier avatar. And today there's a complete cleaning of the mainstream space. I don't get access to this mainstream space. So when you've lost that kind of access, you're still relevant, right? Over 10 years, this big change has happened. Like the space for opposition voices has completely gone out. And so even then you stay relevant. And then the question is, how are you staying relevant? How are you inciting this? How are you provoking this? Because the more you make them speak, the more you make them expose their own arguments, the more you make them expose the shallowness, the more you make them expose their entitlement, you make them expose their hatred. And I think that this has happened because of two things. One is, for all its shortfalls, social media is absolute theater. You know that. It's so easy to bait them. It's so easy to bait them to say the things that they're going to say in order for you to say the things you want to say. And I think if you can play it in a classy way, you can get your message across. And the second thing is, And this is where I think India's university system is good, because if you look at it as a publishing project, how many books I sell and what's the extent that book sales alone have. I don't think I have that reach. I'm not a Chetan Bhagat, but I'm not an Amish Tripathi. But what I have is because my work is taught in a lot of universities across the country, most of these upper caste men strangely find themselves maybe not with, but in the presence and company of a lot of women who are feminist, who also, may be upper caste and who are reading my works through their, their English syllabus, their humanities courses, whatever optional they choose. And because you happen to be this, integral part of their intellectual fashioning and intellectual, or what do you call, self-identity or self-commodification or self-objectification. Like if somebody reads Miss Militancy, then they have like some kind of feminist cred. And once you become that kind of identity, you create an identity for someone else, then these men have to reconcile or, in some way face you, because they are being exposed to you through some other channel. So I think a lot of these men, for instance, come at festivals and say, like, can you sign this book for my girlfriend? Like, are you like illiterate? I respect your girlfriend that she reads me and likes my work. But the idea is that they don't want to engage themselves, so.
Yeah, but the way, like, for example, when you say that you do the work to kind of get a response for them. So sometimes a few of my friends tell me that writers like you become a litmus test. If they have to meet someone new, they'll bring your name up and they will see how the person reacts. And that kind of gives them a whole lot of insight into who that person actually is.
Wow.
So your work has a deep impact on people's choices, life. So how do you feel about that? Do you feel pressured by it in any way?
Being the litmus test.
Yeah.
No, this is actually quite interesting, and because I never thought about it this way. Once, this was 5 or 6 years ago, a woman from Kerala came and said to me that she got rejected in the marriage proposal. And the reason the family of the boy gave for rejecting her was saying, oh, she's the type of woman who reads Meena Kandasamy's poetry. And then you realize that, it becomes an individual branding for this person. Okay, this is a woman we should keep away from, this kind of feminist. So I didn't assume that, this kind of effect would be there. Is there a pressure?
But it's two ways, right? The duality. If you can take something away, you can give it also. So like,
What do you
if
mean?
this person who got categorized and not engaged with because she reads your poetry.
No, she
So
can be useful in, multiplicity of ways. Yeah.
Yeah, so the opposite also is true, that someone will get rejected for not liking your work.
Oh, yes.
That's what I'm saying.
Oh, okay. Oh, I hope that also keeps happening.
Yeah.
Even though that's very narcissistic to say. No, but how does the pressure work for me? No, actually, I sometimes think, when I have these horrible threats, and I think I sometimes tell myself, but these people don't know me. People who make these threats to you, like, they know your work, but they have never had a coffee with you. They've never spent a morning with you. They don't know what you think about, I don't know, like stray dogs. They don't know what you think about children. Like, and they have never met you in any social setting for them to have this hatred towards you. It's a hatred towards an idea. And I think that allows you to put a kind of safe distance. But I also think that in some ways, I think you are also at the receiving end of this, any kind of publicity or visibility, especially once it's tied up to a set of ideological points, means that you're constantly alert. Like when I go shopping, for instance, a friend of mine wants to take a bag and I'm like, please don't take my bags. I'm like, not because I love carrying my bags, but even the fact that if I'm with someone and they happen to carry a bag and somebody puts a photo of that, the idea that Meena makes someone else carry her bag, because that's the kind of imagery that can go out. I'm sure politicians face like 1,000 times of this, but you also have to be very conscious, I think, that this perception that who you are as a person, because you don't want a mismatch between what you say, because there's no actual mismatch. But you don't want even a perception of a mismatch between who you claim to be or what your writing claims you are and who you actually are. So,
but that's probably a pressure that is playing on your mind because you don't want your writing to be
hypocritical.
Yeah.
You don't want to be two people. Yeah.
Yeah, but for example, if someone's carrying your bag or not carrying your bag,
No, yes, I know what you
that doesn't change what you have written and what your lived experience is. So I don't feel that pressure to.
You don't, but I know what you mean. But I think part of the grammar of the internet has turned into something visual, isn't it? As opposed to textual. And I say this as the writer. And the thing is, any image can be taken absolutely out of context. So, um, so yeah, I think that there is a certain way in which I think all of us feel policed
Yeah.
by the internet,
Yeah, that's true. But
But also life choices. And this is really interesting because so I try to keep my personal life personal, but I also sometimes share, who is my partner and stuff like that. And one of the new type of hate. So in the beginning, the hate is like, oh, she's so ugly. Who's going to be with her? Whatever shit, And then the new hate is that, oh, she's like Dravidoid. So there's a lot of North Indian Hindutva hate groups. And then, but she married an Aryan and she pushed out Aryan children, So, and then they go and they're analyzing the, racial characteristics of your children. And then you feel like, and then they're like, oh, she's so much into Tamil identity. She's so much into, anti-caste politics. But why wouldn't she marry somebody from here? So these personal questions also get, pulled up and made into subjects of debate, I think. I think it's just hilarious, but...
What do you think motivates or impacts what you write the most? Is it the politics around you or is it the life you lead?
I think motivation for what you write actually comes a lot from how you understand the world. And I started writing like 20 years ago. And I think in the late 90s when I was growing up, and I was growing up in Chennai, Tamil Nadu was, one of the places where highest number of very violent caste atrocities were happening. There was the May level of a massacre. 7 people were beheaded because, a Dalit man wanted, and one as a village president. And then you also had all these, very graphic honor killings that were taking place very much North Tamil Nadu, where we are now. And also Batani Tola happened, Lakshmanpur Bate happened, all of these Ranveer Sena type killings. And I think that growing up in that atmosphere, we really understood that, like caste was such a evil thing that could wipe out people's lives and undo their lives in a minute. So I think I started writing from that position on, that period. But working on that or, trying to understand how did people fight the system? How did communism come? What was the role of this? So I think you start developing a little bit. And then I think my early work was feminist, but I also think that at some point your own feminism sharpens, right? Like you're a feminist out of a philosophical idea that, women are equal and I'm equal. And then you realize that you pay a price for calling yourself a feminist. And then your work, actually starts looking at that kind of thing. So I think my writing possibly was not out of self-definition, like who am I? I think it was much more about what do we do about everything that's going on around us and how do we make sense of this? I also think it comes, or at least it came in the early stages from absolute helplessness. Like what can you do as an individual? Because it's not like you can go out and stop something, but we'll have to all change as a society and things like that. So yeah.
So that was a time when you were like experiencing, firsthand information about your identity being marginalized. And in today's world, that has kind of grown so many folds. So if you see what's happening in Gaza, we are live streaming a war. So in a time like this, as a writer, how do you feel?
Kunal, I think Gaza is very interesting that you bring it up. But I actually, in many ways, I think it's the question of war is very interesting. Because again, I don't want to date myself or sound very old, but in the 80s, for instance, Tamil people living in Tamil Nadu, at some point the Indian peacekeeping forces go to Sri Lanka. So it's called the IPKF, the peacekeeping forces, but they don't end up keeping peace. What they end up doing is raping the women in Jaffna, doing absolute atrocities, burning villages like Balvatiturai, just because it happens to be the place where Prabhakaran is born. A huge number of atrocities, civilian killings, civilian deaths, torching homes, rape of women, and the news keeps coming to you. And so even in the 80s, the understanding of why people are taking up arms, especially the question of why women were taking up arms, because this, even if you're too small a child to understand rape, you have to understand that, okay, women are willing to kill in order to make themselves safe. And that message gets across. We grew up with that. We grew up seeing the refugee influx. We grew up seeing what our own state was doing by, sending our military army to, fight and repress the Tamil people, and to understand what it is to have a liberation movement. So I think it was like, again, I never assumed I would write about it one day. And I never had any intention, because it was a big struggle. It was the struggle that kind of, was the landscape to a lot of people growing up here. In many ways, it also was the source of the Dalit militancy that came in Tamil Nadu. If I talk about Mela Valava, if we talk about the Dalit Panthers, who were very inspired, let's say the Liberation Panthers even borrow their name from the Liberation Tigers. So the militancy in Elam, in Sri Lanka, influenced Dalit people here to fight for their own rights. And I think it was huge for us. But why this ties back to Gaza, ties back to Palestine, is because liberation movements around the world were inspired by Palestine, right? Like the PLO and Yasser Arafat and even the Tigers were all at some point taking training from the Palestinian. And even if it was not actual training, they were also taking ideological training, like how do you articulate the right for self-determination. So this has been a long struggle. To understand Palestine has been like a huge, like from the 80s, this has been going on in conversation, like why Palestine should be free, why we fight occupation. But today we see this live stream genocide, and I think it's, especially when, you grew up here or you lived here, 2009 is a very interesting point, because that was when the genocide of Elam Tamils happened. And it was a war without witnesses, because media couldn't go, only embedded journalists could go, and close to 100,000 Tamil people were dead or disappeared, right? And you got only one-sided reports, but you also got a lot of these template things were happening. People were told, go into these safe zones. And the minute they moved into these safe zones, those safe zones were bombed. They put carpet bombs, they put cluster bombs. And then, like the entire people who were living in Jaffna, Kilinochchi, Vavuniya, all of them were shrunk into this tiny strip of land, Mullivaikal, or the Nandikadal Lagoon, and they were killed there. Literally the entire population moved. They were bombing hospitals. So whatever Israel is doing there, in some ways you think, where these counterinsurgency, as they like to call themselves, but were all these imperialist powers already experimenting this in various parts of the world? Was 2009 Elam an experiment to what's going on in Gaza now? And if Gaza is happening today, is Gaza a playbook or a kind of, I wouldn't say laboratory, because they're not just testing, but it's not just a testing ground for all these weapons and all these systems and all these ways of warfare, but are they going to employ it elsewhere? And they might as well be doing it, for land grab, for whatever it takes. So I think that, what is happening today, in a sense, it shows all our absolute powerlessness, like screaming, signing petitions, sharing things, contributing to fundraisers, writing. I don't know if anything changes anything at all.
Yeah, but as an artist, it does do something to you. Like basically after 7th October, if you are seeing this sort of media narratives being reported, plus the reality of what is actually happening, that does change every time you take up a pen and try to write something. So how does that happen? If you are kind of seeing what's going on in the outside world and then you kind of sit down to write something, even if the story is personal, that would have an impact on how you're feeling and how you're creating art further on.
Yes.
So how do you deal with that?
Okay. Thank you for this question. Actually, I don't know how to answer this, but I think I was affected much more as a mother than I was affected as a writer. Because, the children who are dying in Gaza are very small children. They are like, 2, 3, 4, 6 months old. They published this list, and the first 27 pages of this list of the killed 18,000 children, that's the number, the last numbers have been that. And as a mother, I feel guilty. And I shouldn't feel guilty about my own children, right? And you tuck them into bed, you put them to bed. And you're like, what is it about my life that allows me to be a mother? To know that I put them to bed, I don't know, I come here. I know that I can go back to them and they're not going to be bombed. I know that I can tell them to sleep. I know they wouldn't be bombed. And I think that is a fundamental injustice you cannot question. I mean, as a mother, I think the killing of children that you have witnessed in this genocide is something I have not understood or have nothing to place it with. But also the fact that, as you said, we are seeing these visuals, we're seeing these images. We saw small children organize a press conference actually from Gaza, say, stop doing this to us. But the relentless killing of children, the way in which, parents go to bed apparently writing the names of their children on their limbs so that, they know whose child it was. I think that it changes and alters your motherhood, because when you become a mother, it's a moment of celebration that you brought life into this earth. You never say, why me? You never say, why am I lucky? You never say, why is it another mother is losing her child at this moment? And I think this is something that all of us are raising children with grief. We are not raising children with happiness. We are raising children with grief. We are raising children with guilt. And it's not normal. It's not normal because, I don't know, we don't show it to our children. And even if we try to have conversations, there's only so much you can talk to your children. But I don't think any other generation around the world is going to feel the weight of this, because what is happening to a mother's love, it's a very butchered, broken, scattered love you're giving to them. And I think if it can transform my motherhood, I am not able to comprehend how it transforms me as a writer. Because I think as a writer, these are questions that I have possibly gone through. Do you support Hamas? Do you support LTT? The question is, that's not the question. The question is, do you support people's right to resistance? And do you support the forms in which it can take, the forms in which people decide to find meaning, the forms in which they can resist oppression? That's left to the people. It's not for me to decide. It's for the people of Gaza. It's for the people of Elam, right? So these questions, the philosophical, intellectual dimensions, the Marxist dimensions, are intellectual thought exercises. They are also moral questions. And though I think I may have some experience, exposure, training in knowing how to answer that, but nothing prepared me for what it could make me feel about motherhood. So yeah, and I still don't know what it means.
I think we're heavily informed and at the same time mostly clueless about what is happening because of the over information that is coming to us. So how do you block that out to your children, like what's happening outside in the world? How much of it and at what time you let them know what's going on? I'm sure it's very personal. Everybody decides for themselves. Yeah. You can't protect your kids from information because they interact with someone and they might give it to them. How do you parent in a time like this? So much information is out there. Not all is meant for your kid.
Yeah.
But
I think we're also very overprotective. Like, I mean, our parents were happy. I mean, my parents had a strict no TV policy. So I don't know, I was their lab rat or whatever. But which means that I was reading the newspaper. And my earliest memory of death was actually waking up and reading about Rajiv's assassination. I was 7. And I think I stopped eating for like a week. I was throwing up everything because, and this is very strange. So I came from a family that actually was Tiger supporters. We wanted Elam to be independent. So we came from that kind of political background. But the idea of what death could do to a person, you never seen it up close. And for me, that's the reason I bring it up is because parents at that age, I mean, never bothered, right, what you were exposed to, what you were reading, like, But I think in our generation, you can't protect. I know one day my 8-year-old comes and says, what's the Baathist party doing in Syria? I'm like, I don't know what's the Baathist party. He was reading the paper. And then his father, of course, he's a communist and commie, so he likes to sitting down and talk about all of this. But, it's not for me. So we have broad conversations. The children are very happy if they can talk about any public figure and say they are a scoundrel. So they go around walking that saying this person is a scoundrel. We have told the children that they cannot use the F word, which my children took as permission to mean that they can write the F word. So I discovered them in their notebook and they had written in cursive all these words. And I'm like, why have you written this down? And I'm like, you said you cannot say those words. That's why I decided to write those words. So, so yeah, what can you do with your children? There's only so much you can control. I don't try to control. I try to engage with them. It's very interesting. We have had a conversation on Palestine. We've had a conversation on Trump, on deportations. So one of my sons happened to be British and the other is American. So they are a funny family. So, you know, so this kind of conversation, they're 6 and 8. So it's quite interesting that, you know, they're quite precocious and they listen. But we've never had a conversation on caste. Because how do you unpack caste to children at this age yet, you know, and when they're like half white? But they are working their way towards it. They're trying to understand why we cannot eat eggs at school. Or, you know, or my son cannot believe, but human beings are omnivore, mama. So for him, it's a scientific fact that human beings have to eat everything. And then he cannot understand, you know. So I think that's like, that's a more conversation that I have given him books on Ambedkar to read, you know, books by Periyar. So, you know, you can have that kind of, you don't sit them down and talk to them because you don't want them to wear the weight of identity, but you want them to know politics or, you know, whatever they can grasp at their age. So, I don't know,
but
unconventional, but
it's very unconventional.
Yeah.
But it is all like how you pointing out that you kind of read in the newspaper that the Prime Minister of our country has been assassinated.
Yeah.
That must have had a huge impact on like just that time, you know, being so young and reading something like that. And so your method is probably better where you are introducing them to these conflicts and kind of these tricky things to navigate, especially things like caste. Your approach to introduce them to these topics.
No, because I think, Kunal, it ties up with what I was telling to you earlier. Because see, as a writer, I have big issue with people giving trigger warnings. I mean, this is happening in someone's life and you're worried about just reading about it. I mean, like, we have to protect ourselves. I'm not saying I don't get triggered. I'm not saying I don't get hurt reading some things. The individualistic idea that, you know, reading something is going to hurt you more than what somebody is actually suffering through it. I think like that kind of cushioning, I don't want my writing to be about. I'm not here, I'm not a pillow. I'm not, you know, like your soft toy or something, you know, your comforter. I mean, like, I'm a writer. I'm meant to provoke and disturb. And again, that's the same thing with my children. I'm like, you know, they are alive and they're lucky in so many ways we cannot even comprehend. Children in Gaza are dying. They can very well read about the deaths, you know. So the idea that my children should be so protected in a world where children are actually losing their life, I don't think they have that privilege. I don't think they should have that privilege. I mean, for me, because what are we going to do? Putting them in these bubble wraps, how much can we cushion them against the injustices outside? So I think I'm firmly opposed to that.
What do you see yourself writing in the next maybe a decade?
This is only ChatGPT can tell me what do I write.
I'm sure there will be a trajectory which will be what you should do. ChatGPT will tell you what you should do in the next 10 years so that your publishers don't
throw me out.
Yeah, throw you out and you sell a lot of books. But what do you want to do? Like, I know it's a very broad question, but I'm sure like I'll have plan for the next
No, I mean, like, if you're hiring and I have to answer where I see myself in 10 years, I mean, no one's asked me this question because...
But writing...
No, Kunal, because I think the understanding in general society is that people see us as frivolous people. I'm sorry to break your...
Yeah, no, it's fine.
We are artists. I think nobody takes us seriously to ask us what do we see ourselves doing in 10 years' time. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I mean, you're a comic, I may be a poet, but at the heart of it, we are like 10 years, like, you think, I don't know, no one has asked me this question, so...
But I actually feel there is a...
People ask you this.
No, but I myself...
you ask yourself.
Yeah, what would you be joking about in the next 10 years? And that kind of gives me really funny answers like, oh shit, what will be happening depends. Would Gaza be happening in 10 years? Would that be solved? Where would Trump be? Where would our country be? And in that sense, then what would I write about? What would I joke about?
My next book is coming out. I started writing it before the pandemic, and that's about one of my favorite set of people, which is IT wing trolls.
Ah, right.
So, because I think there's something really interesting happening. A lot of people are writing about it, but my work is fiction. So, which is to understand what is incel we know as a concept, but what is the Sangi incel? What world do they inhabit? What belief systems do they inhabit? Do they believe that they have to go to gyms and develop like, I don't know, Komodo dragon type arms? Or do they just believe that, you have to eat animal, vegetable protein? So, build your muscle, or are they anti-muscle and are they only about developing the intellect, because it comes from Brahmanism. So, and what is their understanding of, sex, for instance, celibacy, for instance, because, the average incel lives in the idea that they're not entitled, like, 80-20, they're going about all these things that Andrew Tate says. But here again, Brahmins or Brahmanical Hindutva, whatever you call it, has the claim to, we were the guys who gave the world Kama Sutra. So at the one point, they also have to be hedonist. On the other point, they also have to rage against a system in which they see that they are not the men who are being desired. So, and they have to other the Muslim, they have to other the Dalit, they have to other whoever they can other. So for me, this is a very complex thing. So that's my next book. That's like the one I'm working on now, should possibly be out next year or so. And after that, ideally, I would like to do a translation of the Sangam poetry in Tamil, because I did the Tirukural in Tamil. The love poetry of the Tirukural in Tamil. Like when I choose projects which are like this, like old, classical, romantic, happy. But then the projects choose me, and that is always like conflict, war, atrocity. So yeah, I think it's a question of balancing.
Balancing the two.
What you like to do, as a person, and what the time and the factors around you tell you should be done.
Yeah, but the basic discourse on gender, it has divided people into like very strong camps. On one hand, you see men who are not married, it's not on the horizon, but every day they are worried about alimony for some reason. And so these kind of things, and the shows that I just saw, that Netflix show, Adolescence, and it's deeply impacting and worrying that the teenagers who have lived with the internet or been born and brought up on the internet, it's a very scary world out there for it. What do you see this divide and this kind of almost everybody being at head-on war with everyone? There's no peaceful coexistence in this world, I feel.
No, I don't know. I don't want to project on the world, but I do think that a lot of these IT cells and organized operators are under nobody's control.
Yeah.
At this point, they've become totally out of control, and we see this happening with any organized IT cell. Like nobody can rein them in. And because they immediately start alt accounts and, like they go on, all of these things, doxing, shaming, deep fakes, and, it goes on to these levels of, I think also very fundamental way in which fascism reacts, is to character assassinate so that they can take away your legitimacy. And IT cells really excel at that, right? Like they can put fake propaganda, they can put fake videos, they can, absolutely undo your life in a day. And they also threaten your security through all of this, because of digital surveillance and stuff like that. Leak your conversations, leak your chats, leak your personal life, and take away what is so personal and, integral to you from yourself. So I think that the internet, which, is very safe and which we look at as a very technological tool, can actually be hiding layers of violence behind it that, on multiple levels can prevent you from functioning, from expressing yourself. So, but in terms of, like, how does it matter how young people are getting radicalized by it? I think they're really, and it's, I think in some way I want to agree with what you say. It's a gender war. Because I think FT actually published this all these charts from various countries. They were like a lot of Northern European countries, the US, and also South Korea and stuff like that. And they were saying that it's not a generational trend as much as it's a generational but gender trend, that the women were becoming far more progressive and the men were becoming far more what they call conservative. But basically, even conservative is a easy word. It's becoming regressive, becoming what you call patriarchal, going back to all of these things. And we have to bridge the gap. And because the women are getting radicalized, because they're looking at society and they're understanding that, social problems require, solutions. Whereas men are looking at the same problems and thinking that, women have to change for things. Women have to be trad wives. Women have to be, soft girl era, whatever it is. And there's immense brainwashing of young women also happening. I mean, I don't think it's just the men, because the culture that's being foisted on the men is also, at this point, obviously the divergence is there. But how long will this divergence hold out? It's not like women are inherently feminist creatures who are going to be progressive and, let's say, left-wing over time. They are still winning over a set of women as well. This whole trad wife thing, or, I want a man in finance, 6'3", and I don't know, so this whole idea that they're also, and this is actually undoing what decades of feminism did, what decades of, communist or progressive thought did, rational thought did. They want to go on a farm, they don't want to vaccinate, they want to drink raw milk. You can make a joke about it, but it's very scary, isn't it?
Yes.
And we'll have to reverse the clock, and I think that's where the work lies for us, I think.
So it's like how you discover information, right? It comes to you, you interact with it. But here people are getting the entire ideology, the entire movement in just a day. Everything to do with gender. Here it is.
Yeah.
And then they don't know how to process it. And that's why I see that they are at war with each other. So I don't know how that gap would be bridged.
No, I think it was Walter Benjamin, but maybe if I'm wrong, somebody should correct me, who said something about what is fascism in some way. And he said I think it was the making politics into an aesthetic. And I think they have really done that, right? Across the world, fascist movements have made, whether it's the trad wives on one hand, or here it's this angry Hanuman stickers, or, that we find, or the angry Ram, or, these representations of this virile masculinity. And in many ways, I think that the idea they're selling, as you said, it's a whole product, it's a whole product line, it's a range. So it's so custom made for you and tailored for you. And on the other end, that if this is what fascists want to do, which is the aestheticization of politics, on the other hand, what communism is about, or left-wing is about, or progressive ideas is about, is the opposite, which is the politicization of art. So for so long, we've had this idea of art as, art for art's sake, or art for whatever aesthetic sake. But you have to do art for politics' sake. You have to make sure that your art actually has a politics to it. And I think that it sounds immense that we have this responsibility against all of these trad wives of the world and all these Instagram reels from some farm somewhere, or people drinking raw milk, or people not vaccinating their children, or this idea of this 80-20, that 20% of men are going to get 80% of the girls. So, all of this on the one hand, but I think that the space to counter that, the reasoning and the rationale and the politics and the propaganda, I think it's also with us, right? We just cannot let them just take away all of it. Or Elon Musk, what he's doing, I don't know, just spawning babies and making women sign these non-disclosure agreements. It's at a stage when, you cannot even parse it, right, for common sense. So, yeah.
So this sort of a time gives you a greater responsibility, and as an artist, you're up to take that.
Yes, I think, yeah. I don't like the word responsibility. I like to think of myself as an irresponsible person, but...
So what can we change responsibility with? Duty? That's even...
No, not duty, not responsibility.
Motivation?
The drive, I don't know.
The drive?
No, but actually coming back to your question, I often cite this, and I invariably cite it in all interviews, is this Latin American scholar called, writer called Tony Cade Bambara, who said something like, the duty of the radical artist is to make the revolution irresistible. And I think in some ways it's, I don't know, duty, responsibility, whatever, that all of us owe to, we have to make that change possible, and in some, like, I don't know, like inject it or maybe make it apparent, but make sure that we are talking against all of this.
Correct.